Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the St. Petersburg Virtual Science Festival. We're incredibly excited that you're here. If you know Florida, you know manatees. And so I'm very excited to be introducing our next speaker, who is Andrea Swinehart. And she's going to be speaking from the Save the Manatee Club. And her talk today is about Meet the Florida Manatee. So, Andrea, please go ahead, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let me pull up my presentation here so we can get talking about those manatees. Uh, All right. So today we are going to talk about the Florida manatee. You can see here on the screen. My name is Andrea, and I'm a volunteer with the Save the Manatee Club. I also have been a zookeeper for about 15 years. I've had the pleasure of working with a pretty wide variety of species, but manatees are definitely one of the nearest and dearest to my heart. So I'm really excited to share some cool facts with you today. So first, what is a manatee? Basically, they are sea cows. They're just large gray mammals. They're grazing on grasses for most of the day. Since they are mammals, they do breathe air. They're also actually Florida's official state marine mammal, which I think is something that's pretty cool. So first, just to kind of get an idea of the size of a manatee, they are pretty big. Here you can see the silhouette of a manatee, and it's next to an adult human, definitely a little bit larger. So manatees, when they are full grown, can reach lengths of about 10 feet, and they can weigh over 1,000 pounds. So pretty hefty. You can see here, they're a little bit closer to the size of a small car than they are to the size of a human. When they're born, they're smaller for sure. They're still pretty big for a baby though. They can be about 3 to 4 feet long and weigh about 60 pounds. So even though today we're going to mostly be talking about the Florida manatee, I did want to introduce you to some of their cousins. First, though, the Florida manatee is actually a subspecies or a type of West Indian manatee. And those types of manatees are found, mostly around Florida, but as far south as Central America and the northern tip of South America. Uh, they also have a cousin known as the Amazonian manatee, which is a species that is found in the Amazon River in South America. There's the West African manatee that is found on the west coast of Africa. And then they have another cousin that is called a dugong. And they look pretty similar to manatees, a little bit different. If you look here at the picture, they do have tails that are a little bit more similar to dolphin flukes. And they are found in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The largest population currently is found in Australia. And then unfortunately, there is another cousin that they had that is now extinct called the Seller's sea cow, which it's a shame it's not still around. It's a pretty cool looking animal. And they are all types of Sirenians, which is really just a fancy word for sea cow. So you might not think that manatees and elephants are related, but they actually are. And once you look at them, there are a lot of similarities that I think are pretty neat. Here you can see in the picture, there is a manatee that's grazing on grasses, and there's also an elephant that's grazing on browse from trees. And elephants, as I'm sure a lot of you know, use that trunk to grasp branches from trees, pull them down to eat them. And manatees have a pretty similar sort of adaptation. They have a prehensile upper lip. It's a really strong upper lip. They can use almost kind of like a finger or a little hand, and they can grasp onto those grasses and pull them into their mouth. And then if you also look closely at the elephant's feet, they've got some pretty big toenails there. And you might not have known this, but manatees also have little toenails, and theirs are located on their flippers. So manatees, those sea cows, they are grazers. They spend a pretty good portion of their day just eating and eating and eating. They can eat up to about 10% of their body weight. So if a manatee weighs over 1,000 pounds, that means they can eat about 100 pounds of grass, just grass a day. So it's super fun to watch manatees when they are grazing, but you never want to give them any food or anything like that. They do have a specialized diet, so you don't want to give them anything that could make them sick, but definitely feel free to hang out from a good, safe distance and watch them graze. A really cool adaptation that manatees have, since they are grazers, they will chew their food with molars. They have marching molars. And so basically, what happens is as the manatees age, their teeth will start to grind down because of all the grasses they're eating. And so they might lose some teeth from the front of their mouth, but they're continuously forming new molars in the back of their mouth that will push the teeth forward. So they're constantly regenerating and replacing new teeth, which I just think is so cool. And here you can see those cute little button eyes manatees have. I just think they're adorable. Their eyesight is actually a sense that they rely upon to navigate their environment. Even though those eyes are pretty small, they can see pretty well and they can actually see colors, just like dogs and cats can, just not all the colors that we can. Another sense that manatees rely really heavily upon is their sense of touch. They are really tactile. They have a whole bunch of little tiny tactile hairs that are called vibrissurae, and those are all over their bodies. But my favorite part is that little muzzle. You can see here, there's a whole bunch of little hairs on their muzzle, and they really are tactile. They'll investigate their environment. They're really curious, so they'll use their nose and their mouth to explore their environment. And a lot of people ask me what manatees feel like. When I've worked with manatees during medical procedures, I've had the chance to feel them. And to me, they feel like hairy baked potatoes. I think they kind of look like baked potatoes too. So manatees, once again, are mammals. They do breathe air. Usually they'll take a breath every 3 to 5 minutes, but when they are resting, which they will rest throughout the day periodically in between eating all that grass, then they might hold their breath for up to 20 minutes. So they will kind of rest on the bottom and come up for breaths. But then when they're more active, they will take a breath maybe as often as every 30 seconds. So manatees do have some vocalizations. I'm gonna be quiet for a second and let you guys hear some of those vocalizations. So did you guys hear all those little squeaks? I just think it's so funny that such a large animal makes such a high pitched, small noise. I've actually been lucky enough when I've been diving in manatee exhibits and cleaning them to hear those little squeaks. They're really hard to hear. I really had to kind of be quiet. So if you're ever snorkeling maybe in a spring or something and you're lucky enough to have a manatee approach you, try and be really quiet. You might be lucky enough to hear some of those noises. But then slowly try to move away because we do want to give manatees space in their natural environment. So here I'll show you a little video of manatees and how they navigate through the water. They have those large, powerful tails, paddles, and they will move them up and down to propel their body forward. Then you can see they're using those little flippers to kind of move around obstacles, maybe crawl along the bottom of the water. And typically, they're pretty slow moving animals. They'll usually travel about 5 miles per hour, but they can go in short bursts of up to about 20 miles per hour if they are excited by something or, trying to get away from something. Their tails are super strong. So, once again, if you do see them when you're out in the water with them, you want to give them space because those paddles are really strong and they wouldn't mean to, but they could accidentally hurt you. So manatees will usually give birth to one calf at a time. It is not very typical. They occasionally can give birth to twins, but usually just one. And they'll usually have one calf every 2 to 5 years. And the calf will stay with mom for about 2 years, just learning how to be a manatee. They can live to be about 60 years old, but unfortunately, in the wild, they do face some challenges. So they don't always make it to that age. So we are super lucky to live in Florida and have these guys living in waters all around us, and especially around the St. Pete area. If you are around a body of water in St. Pete, it's very likely that there is a manatee swimming close to you, unless it's maybe a pond. But they do like shallow, slow moving water. Shallow water is where the grasses tend to grow the best. They can live in fresh water or salt water or waters that are in between. And they definitely like warmer waters. So if you're ever out in nature with your family, definitely keep your eyes peeled for manatees. They're kind of hard to see sometimes at first. They kind of look like giant rocks. But if you look closely and patiently, you can see their little noses come up when they take a breath. And if you're kind of quiet and you're close enough, you'll be able to hear them take that breath as well, which I just think is so cool. I get excited every time. So here's a diagram that shows you the distribution of manatees seasonally. So during the summertime, you can see that they will move along the Gulf Coast as well as the Atlantic coast. But then during the wintertime, when it starts to cool down, they once again do like the warmer waters of Florida. So they'll stick around the peninsula of Florida. They'll usually kind of swim up river systems and maybe hang out in springs to help deal with that cold weather. Manatees are what we call a semi-social species. So during the winter, when they're all trying to stay warm, they might huddle together. You'll see 100 of them all together. It's really cool. I definitely suggest going to the springs during the winter. And then during the summer, they're a little bit more on their own and they will travel around and explore and just look for grasses. There's not really a family unit with manatees except for the mother and the baby that will hang out for about 2 years. So I'll talk a little bit more in a second about how manatees get their scars, but here's a diagram that shows you how scientists will identify manatees. Um, Manatees just look kind of the same. They're big gray things, but there are individual characteristics that manatees may have that scientists will document and then use to be able to identify manatees. That way they can know kind of who's hanging out where, who's doing what. And so any of these scar patterns that they have are definitely useful for identifying these individuals. So I just want to introduce you to a manatee that is well known to the Save the Manatee Club. His name is Gator, and you can see he's got a pretty recognizable scar on his back there. It's pretty large. And Gator is named Gator because an interaction that he was observed having with an alligator. Fortunately for manatees, alligators don't really consider manatees worth the effort of trying to eat them. They're just too big. So manatees don't have any natural predators. So these curious little guys, Gator was just going up to an alligator and just playing with his feet. So really cool individual. So like I mentioned, manatees don't have any natural predators, but they do face some challenges. I talked about those scars, and Manatees will unfortunately get those scars from interactions with boats that are moving too quickly. So, if you're ever out in the boat with your family and you're going a little bit fast, maybe just remind your family to slow down if they see any signs that say it's a manatee zone. And remember to keep your eyes peeled. That way, you can talk to people about the manatees and why it's important to slow down to save these really cool animals. Trash and pollution are two other obstacles that manatees face. Any litter that accidentally ends up in the ocean is unfortunately maybe going to be eaten by a manatee. They can also get entangled in trash, like fishing line, which is what you can see in this image here. And pollution can also kill the plants that the manatees graze upon. But luckily, here in Florida, there are a ton of people that love these animals. There are a lot of organizations, really great all around the state, that keep their ears and eyes open for any manatees that might be in trouble. And they all work together to rescue the manatees if it seems like they need to be rescued. And so they are then transported to zoos and aquariums where vets can nurse them back to health. And once they are healthy, they can release them back out into their natural habitat. So there's some really easy ways that you can help manatees. My favorite way is just to go out into nature and observe them and watch them. Just be patient. They do move really slow, so you have to hang out for a little while, just observe their behavior. They're super fun to watch. Um, and you can just talk to people then about all the cool things that you see. So if you're with your family, just give a shout out, hey guys, there's a manatee. Um, but just remember, you don't want to feed them or give them water. You don't want to try and touch them or get too close to them. That can stress them out, or it can make them too used to being around boats, which is, as we talked about, dangerous for them. So definitely keep an eye out for those guys. Also, you can encourage your family to keep this number handy. You can write it down. And if you are ever out on the water in a boat, and you see a manatee that you might think needs help, then you can give this number a call and they will come and check that manatee out. And you might help save a manatee life. Another really easy thing you can do is to make sure that any trash gets stored in the proper receptacles. You want to try and use reusable items. Honestly, that's the easiest thing to do to keep trash out of the ocean is to just be aware and think, do I really need to use the straw or this plastic bag? And if you think you can go without it, then you don't even have to use that trash and it will never end up in the ocean. And then if you ever are fishing, just make sure that you stow your fishing line properly after you're done. And there's a whole bunch of really great resources out there on the web that you can visit to learn about manatees and watch more videos. Um, SaveTheManatee.org is the Save the Manatee Club website. So there's a ton of great information there. There's also a really relaxing webcam that you can watch, which is really fun to do. There are also programs that your teacher might want to get involved with. There is a Adopt a Manatee program. So then your whole class can adopt a manatee, and then you learn about an individual manatee, and you can do activities throughout the year. So that's something really fun. Or if you just want to do it on your own, you can just make your own presentation or a play or just be creative and have fun with it. Maybe it's just art or something. And just spread the word about how cool these animals are. So if you do decide to join the Adopt a Manatee program on your own, that's an option as well. And you can sign up and then you get all of this cool information about manatees. You get a certificate of adoption of a manatee of your choice. And you learn just about the individual personality because they really do all have different personalities, just like humans do. And they're such interesting animals. You wouldn't think maybe that they'd really be that smart, but they are as smart as they need to be. And to be able to navigate some of the challenges in the wild, especially like boats, they have to be pretty smart. So thank you so much for joining me. And are there any questions out there?
Thank you very much, Andrea. Love the presentation, and we're actually getting a lot of great questions in already. So if
Ooh.
you have your questions, do send them in. We're going to try to get to as many as possible, but do keep in mind we have about 3,300 students signed up to participate in the festival. So if we don't get to your question, don't get discouraged. We're keeping track of all the questions that we're going to try and get answers to, and we'll try and get those answers back out to everyone. So one of the first questions that came in is, why is the manatee's pitch so high when they communicate?
Um, well, a lot of animals that live underwater do communicate in very high pitched tones. And so it might just be that those frequencies are able to travel further through the water and it can help them communicate from a little bit further of a distance.
And so baby manatees, I know you said that it's 2 to 5 years they're with the mother, but how long does it take the baby manatee to actually be born?
It can take a little while. It kind of depends. The pregnancy is a little while for sure. The mother is pregnant for about 11 months, and then labor it can be. I mean, kind of like a human, it can vary. 30 minutes to an hour or two.
Okay. How many manatees get hit by boats every year?
Oh, I am not sure exactly of the number right now, but I do know that unfortunately, recently regulations have kind of been decreased for manatees because the manatee populations have been actually doing really well and rising. But I know in the past year, the number of manatees that have been struck by boats have started to increase again as well. So it's really important that we don't let our guard down and we remember to keep a lookout for these guys.
So, what made you start working with manatees? What got you interested in manatees?
I'm originally from Kansas, so you don't really see any manatees around there. But I was fortunate enough to have a family that lived here in Florida, and especially going out to Sanibel Island when I was young. I just remember being lucky enough to see manatees and just thinking they were so cool. So marine mammals were always a really big point of interest for me. I moved to South Carolina and was out in the rivers all the time, continued every now and then to see manatees. So, really, they've just been a really important part of my life. And I honestly didn't really want to work with manatees at first. I wanted to work more with dolphins. But once I actually worked with the manatees, they shot their way up there to one of my favorite species. They're just so gentle and fun to watch.
Fascinating. How small is the smallest manatee? Like, how big are the babies typically, but how have been some of the smallest and biggest manatees that we know of?
Well, I had the pleasure of working with a particularly small orphaned manatee that was found at a spring during the winter, and she was about 30 pounds. So she was a little tiny nugget when I first started working with her. So they definitely can get pretty small. Um, but then they'll 800 pounds is probably about the smallest size for an adult manatee.
Okay. Can you give a little bit more information about the teeth? Do they continuously grow like how squirrels' teeth continuously grow?
Yeah, they do. They're continuously formed in the back of their mouth. So they'll lose teeth in the front and they'll just push their way forward, which I'm super jealous. I wish I had that adaptation.
So you said the babies stay with the mothers for 2 to 5 years, correct?
Yeah.
What role, if any, does the father play with raising the manatee babies?
So the dad doesn't really generally play a role, but when manatees are all hanging out together, sometimes some of the other females will kind of step in and just keep an eye on the baby. But it's not something that is really highly organized, like in a structure where you might see with elephants, where there's a really strong family group.
Okay.
Typically, it is just the mother and the calf that will hang out together.
Have there ever been any cases where manatees have been harmful to humans or hurt humans?
I'm sure that there's been at least one instance, but I also am sure that it's been an accident. I don't remember of hearing any
Okay.
instances. But anytime that you get too close to any wild animal, there is a chance that the animal will get startled by something in their environment. So even though manatees are one of the most gentle, laid back animals that I have ever worked with, if they get spooked, their tail very powerful. And so if it hits somebody, that could definitely smart a little bit.
Okay. In one of the pictures you showed some manatees in the boat, and how long can't don't they die if they stay in the boats too long, or how do you take care
So
of that?
when manatees are being transported, they're okay with being out of the water for, several hours. But generally, people do try and kind of rotate them around and move them a little bit and just massage their bodies a little bit to keep blood flowing. But really, the biggest danger is just they are so large. So if they need to be out of water for a more extended period of time, then really they would need to be transported in a little bit of water. But typically around Florida, it's just a couple hour drive if you need to transport a manatee. So they tend to do okay. We also usually, when we would transport them, just put a little bit of water on them throughout the ride just to make them more comfortable.
Okay, I know we're getting close to time, so I'm going to wrap up with one of the last questions that just came in. Do you ever work with any other animals, or do you work strictly with manatees?
So unfortunately, I don't work with manatees anymore, which is why I decided to become a volunteer for the Save the Manatee Club. I still wanted to help them in some capacity, and right now I work mostly with rhinos and cheetah. So yeah, just a ton of cool experiences. Animals are the best. I highly encourage just learning about every animal out there because you never know which one's going to be your next favorite.
Wonderful. Andrea, it was a pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much for all the insights. I'm hoping a lot of the students that have been watching, take in a lot of what you said and do actions at their home to help with, manatees and preservation. So thank you very much. Those of you that are here, feel free to stay on this track. Feel free to join us for another track, and we look forward to having you and have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.